The smoke alarm shrieked through Elizabeth's apartment with an ear-splitting wail that jolted her from the deepest sleep she'd had in weeks. She shot upright in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as confusion and terror tangled together in her chest. The sound was relentless, drilling into her skull, and for 3 terrifying seconds, she couldn't remember where she was or what was happening. Smoke. Fire. She had to get out. She scrambled out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold, hardwood floor as she looked around wildly for any sign of flames. The room was dark, except for the glow of her alarm clock, 2:47 a.m., and she couldn't see any smoke, couldn't smell anything burning, but the alarm kept screaming, and she couldn't think straight. Elizabeth ran for her bedroom door, then stopped, her hand hovering over the handle. She'd learned somewhere, sometime, that you were supposed to feel the door for heat before opening it during a fire. Her palm pressed flat against the wood. Cool. She yanked it open and stumbled into her hallway, looking left and right, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Nothing. No smoke. No flames. Just that horrible, unending shriek from the detector mounted on her ceiling. She was wearing nothing but an oversized t-shirt that barely reached mid-thigh and a pair of underwear. Her hair was a tangled mess, her mascara probably smeared beneath her eyes from falling asleep without washing her face. But none of that mattered because the alarm was still going off, and she still didn't know if she was about to die. The pounding on her door nearly sent her through the roof. "Fire department, open up!" Elizabeth's legs almost gave out beneath her. The fire department. That meant this was real. That meant there was actually a fire somewhere, and they'd come to save her, and she was standing here in her underwear, about to either burn to death or humiliate herself in front of emergency responders. The pounding came again, harder this time. "Fire department! We need to check this unit! Open the door!" She stumbled forward, her shaking hands fumbling with the deadbolt. The chain. She couldn't make her fingers work properly, couldn't coordinate the simple movements required to undo the locks that stood between her and safety. The alarm was still screaming, and now there was shouting in the hallway, and she was going to die because she couldn't unlock her own door. Finally, mercifully, the deadbolt turned. She yanked the door open and found herself face to face with a wall of firefighting gear. Heavy coat, reflective stripes, an oxygen tank strapped to a broad back. Her gaze traveled upward, past the radio crackling on his shoulder, past the strong line of his jaw, until she met the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with the kind of presence that seemed to fill the entire doorway. His helmet sat firmly on his head, and his expression was focused, professional. But the moment his eyes landed on her, standing there in her t-shirt, her legs bare, her hair wild, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or concern. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Daniel Reeves. We received an alarm from this unit. Are you hurt? Is anyone else inside?" Elizabeth opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. She was suddenly, painfully aware of how she must look, how little she was wearing, how close he was standing. I don't know what happened. I was sleeping and the alarm just... I don't smell smoke. I don't see anything. I don't know why it's... "It's okay. Take a breath. We're going to figure this out." His voice was steady, warm, the kind of voice that made you believe everything really would be okay, even when the world felt like it was falling apart. He reached up and pressed a button on his radio. "Unit 7, this is Captain Reeves. I've made contact with the occupant. No visible smoke or flames. Requesting permission to conduct a full sweep of the unit." The radio crackled back with confirmation, and he turned those blue eyes back to Elizabeth. I need to check every room in your apartment. Make sure there's no hidden fire, no electrical issue, nothing smoldering behind the walls. Is that all right? She nodded mutely, stepping back to let him in. As he moved past her, she caught a whiff of something. Smoke, yes, but also something cleaner underneath. Soap, maybe. Or just the scent of competence and calm in the middle of chaos. Stay right here by the door. If I call for you to evacuate, you go straight down the stairs to the lobby. Don't take the elevator. Understood? Understood. He moved through her apartment with practiced efficiency, disappearing first into her kitchen, then her bathroom, then her bedroom. Elizabeth stood frozen by the door, her arms wrapped around herself, suddenly cold despite the adrenaline still pumping through her veins. She watched his flashlight beam sweep across her walls, heard him opening cabinets, checking behind furniture, being thorough in a way that was somehow both terrifying and comforting. The alarm finally stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse, heavy and ringing in her ears. Daniel emerged from her bedroom, his expression shifting from focused professionalism to something softer. He pulled off his helmet, revealing short, cropped brown hair and a face that was, unfortunately, even more handsome without the gear partially obscuring it. Strong cheekbones, a slight cleft in his chin, laugh lines around those impossible blue eyes. Ma'am, I think I know what happened. Your smoke detector is the older model, the kind that's prone to false alarms when the battery gets low. It looks like it went off on its own. There's no fire. You're safe. The relief that crashed through her was so intense it nearly knocked her over. Her knees buckled, and suddenly he was there, one strong hand catching her elbow, steadying her before she could crumple to the floor. Whoa, easy, easy. You're okay. Just breathe. I thought I was going to die. The words came out broken, embarrassing, but she couldn't stop them. The fear she'd been holding at bay flooded through her, and her eyes filled with tears that she blinked back furiously. She was not going to cry in front of this firefighter. She was not going to fall apart in her underwear at 3 a.m. while a complete stranger held her arm. That's a normal response. You did everything right. You checked your door before opening it. You got to safety. You let us in to help. A lot of people panic in situations like this. You kept your head. She laughed, but it came out watery. I opened the door half-dressed and couldn't form a complete sentence. I don't think that counts as keeping my head. Something shifted in his expression. The professional distance remained, but there was warmth underneath it now. Kindness. You're alive and unharmed. That's what matters. He released her arm slowly, like he was making sure she could stand on her own before letting go. Elizabeth immediately missed the steadiness of his touch, which was ridiculous. She didn't know this man. He was just doing his job. I'm going to replace that detector for you before I go. We carry extras on the truck for situations like this. And I'd recommend getting all your detectors checked. If one battery is going, the others might not be far behind. You don't have to do that. I can buy a new one tomorrow. Ma'am, I'm not leaving until I know you're protected. It'll take 2 minutes. He was already moving toward the door, radioing for someone to bring up a new detector. Elizabeth stood in the middle of her living room, still trembling slightly, wondering how this night had gone from peaceful sleep to near-death panic to standing in her underwear while a handsome fire captain insisted on installing safety equipment in her apartment. True to his word, Daniel was back within minutes, a brand new smoke detector in hand. He worked quickly, efficiently, replacing the old one with practiced ease. Elizabeth watched from the kitchen doorway, having finally had the presence of mind to grab a robe from her bedroom closet. How often does this happen? False alarms, I mean. More than you'd think. Old detectors, dying batteries, cooking smoke, steam from showers. We respond to a lot of calls that turn out to be nothing. But we treat every single one like it's real until we know otherwise. That must be exhausting. He paused in his work, glancing over his shoulder at her. Sometimes. But the alternative, missing a real fire because we assumed it, was nothing. That's not something any of us are willing to risk. There was something in the way he said it, a weight behind the words. Elizabeth found herself wanting to ask more, wanting to understand what it cost him to run toward danger while everyone else ran away. But before she could form the question, he was stepping down from her kitchen chair and testing the new detector. All set. This one should give you at least 10 years before you need to think about replacing it. Thank you. Really. I know this must seem so silly compared to actual emergencies, but... Hey. He met her eyes directly, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. Your fear was real. Your panic was real. That's not silly. That's human. She didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever validated her feelings so simply, so completely, without any trace of condescension or dismissal. She was used to being told she was overreacting, being too sensitive, making a big deal out of nothing. But this stranger in firefighting gear had just told her that her terror was valid, and something inside her shifted. I'm Elizabeth, by the way. Elizabeth Mercer. Daniel, though I suppose you already knew that from the whole Captain Reeves introduction. I was a little distracted at the time. Something about thinking my apartment was on fire. He laughed, a genuine warm sound that transformed his face from handsome to devastating. Fair enough. His radio crackled again, and he pressed the button to respond, his eyes never quite leaving hers. The call was brief, something about clearing the scene, returning to the station. When he finished, he gathered his helmet and moved toward the door. Take care of yourself, Elizabeth. And maybe grab a glass of water before you try to go back to sleep. Helps with the adrenaline. I will. Thank you again for everything. He paused in the doorway, one hand on the frame, and looked back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Get some rest. And then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hallway, leaving Elizabeth standing in her robe in the middle of her living room, her heart still racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fire. 2 weeks passed, and Elizabeth couldn't stop thinking about him. It was ridiculous, pathetic even. She'd spent approximately 7 minutes with the man under the most embarrassing circumstances imaginable, and yet here she was, replaying their conversation in her head while she brushed her teeth, while she sat in traffic, while she tried to focus on spreadsheets at work. His voice, his eyes, the way he'd caught her when her knees gave out, so steady and sure. She'd Googled him. She wasn't proud of it, but she'd done it anyway. Captain Daniel Reeves, Station 47, 12 years with the department. There was a photo on the department's website, a formal headshot that didn't do him justice. He looked stiff in it, uncomfortable. Nothing like the man who'd stood in her kitchen and told her that her fear was human. You need to get a grip, Elizabeth. She said it out loud to her empty apartment, as if hearing the words would somehow make them true. She didn't know this man. He'd been doing his job. He was probably like that with everyone, calm, kind, reassuring. It was literally his profession to make people feel safe. But her traitorous brain kept circling back to the way he'd looked at her before he left. The softness in his voice when he'd said her name. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. It was a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after the false alarm, when Elizabeth smelled smoke. Real smoke this time, thick and acrid and unmistakable. She was in the hallway of her building, coming back from the grocery store, arms laden with bags, when the scent hit her and her blood turned to ice. The door to her neighbor's apartment, Mrs. Callahan, the sweet elderly woman who always left cookies outside Elizabeth's door during the holidays, was cracked open, and dark gray smoke was seeping through the gap. "Mrs. Callahan!" Elizabeth dropped her groceries and ran to the door, pushing it open against every instinct that told her not to. The smoke was thicker inside, billowing from the kitchen, and through the haze she could see flames, actual flames, licking up the wall behind the stove. And there, on the floor, was Mrs. Callahan, unconscious, not moving. "Help! Someone help me!" Elizabeth dropped to her knees beside the old woman, her mind racing through every piece of emergency training she'd ever half learned and immediately forgotten. She couldn't lift her. The smoke was getting thicker. She couldn't breathe. She needed to get her out, needed to drag her to safety. But her arms weren't strong enough, and the fire was spreading. And she was going to die here. They were both going to die. The door behind her burst open. "Fire department! Everyone out!" She knew that voice. She'd replayed it in her head 100 times over the past 3 weeks. Elizabeth looked up through stinging, tear-filled eyes and saw Daniel Reeves striding through the smoke like he was born for exactly this moment. "Elizabeth?" The shock of recognition on his face lasted only a split second before training took over. He was at her side in 2 steps, his hands moving to Mrs. Callahan, checking her pulse, her breathing. "I found her like this. I couldn't move her. I tried, but I couldn't." "You did the right thing. I've got her. You need to get out. Now." "I'm not leaving you." His eyes met hers through the smoke, and something passed between them. Something that had no business existing in the middle of an emergency. "Elizabeth, go. I will be right behind you." Other firefighters were pouring into the apartment now, hoses and equipment and shouted commands. Someone grabbed Elizabeth's arm and pulled her toward the door, toward the hallway, toward air that didn't burn her lungs. She let herself be led, looking back over her shoulder just in time to see Daniel lifting Mrs. Callahan in his arms like she weighed nothing at all. The next hour was a blur. Paramedics, questions, a shock blanket someone wrapped around her shoulders even though she insisted she was fine. Mrs. Callahan, thank God, was alive. Smoke inhalation, some minor burns, but she would recover. Elizabeth answered the same questions over and over, described what she'd seen, what she'd done, why she'd run into a burning apartment instead of running away. "I couldn't just leave her." The police officer nodded, wrote something down, moved on to the next question. Elizabeth's eyes kept drifting to the fire trucks, to the organized chaos of firefighters doing their jobs, looking for one face in particular. She found him. Daniel was standing by one of the trucks, his helmet off, his gear streaked with soot. He was talking to another firefighter, but his gaze kept cutting toward where Elizabeth sat on the back of an ambulance. Every time their eyes met, something electric crackled through the smoke-thick air between them. When the other firefighter finally walked away, Daniel made his way over to her. He moved slowly, deliberately, like he was approaching a skittish animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "How are you doing?" "I have no idea." He smiled at that, just a small one, a ghost of the grin she remembered from her apartment. "Yeah, that tracks." He settled onto the ambulance step beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his gear. Or maybe that was just him. She couldn't tell anymore. That was incredibly brave, what you did in there, running into a fire to help someone. Or incredibly stupid. Bit of both, honestly. But Mrs. Callahan is alive because you found her when you did. The doctor said another few minutes and he stopped, shook his head. You saved her life, Elizabeth. The weight of it hit her all at once. She'd saved someone's life. She'd run into a burning building and dragged herself through smoke, and she'd saved someone's life. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over, tracking clean lines through the soot on her cheeks. Hey, it's okay. His hand found hers, a careful touch, almost hesitant, like he wasn't sure he was allowed. His fingers were warm and calloused, and Elizabeth gripped them like a lifeline. I was so scared. I couldn't think. I just kept remembering what you said that night in my apartment. That you treat every call like it's real until you know otherwise. So I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't assume someone else would help. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. You remembered that? I remember everything about that night. The confession hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them seemed ready to address. Daniel's thumb traced a small circle against the back of her hand, a gesture so gentle it made her heart ache. Elizabeth, I need to tell you something. Okay? I've been thinking about you since that night. I know I was there in a professional capacity, and I know it's probably not appropriate for me to say this, but I drove by your building 3 times last week hoping I might see you. I've never done anything like that before in my life. She stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. You did? I couldn't stop thinking about you. The way you stood there in your kitchen, still shaking from fear, and asked me about false alarms like you were genuinely interested. The way you laughed at yourself for being half-dressed. You were... He shook his head. I don't know. Different. Real. I Googled you. I found your picture on the department website. His laugh was surprised, delighted. The one where I look like I'm being held at gunpoint? That's the one. For a moment, they just sat there, smiling at each other like idiots while the chaos of the emergency response continued around them. Then reality reasserted itself, and Elizabeth felt the weight of it pressing down. Are you allowed to pursue someone I met on a call? Technically, no. There's no official policy against it, but it's frowned upon. People worry about power dynamics, about victims mistaking gratitude for attraction. Her stomach dropped. Oh. But I'm not your rescuer. Right now, Elizabeth. You're the one who ran into a burning building today. You're the one who saved a life. And I'm not here as Captain Reeves. I'm here as a guy who hasn't been able to stop thinking about a woman he met 3 weeks ago. A guy who's hoping, against all odds, that maybe she's been thinking about him, too. The hope in his voice broke something open inside her. I have. I really have. Then can I take you to dinner? Somewhere with no smoke detectors and no emergencies? Just you and me, getting to know each other like normal people. I'd like that. He squeezed her hand once, then released it with obvious reluctance. I have to finish up here. Paperwork, debriefing, all the glamorous parts of the job. But can I call you tonight? Make a plan? Elizabeth pulled out her phone, opened a new contact, and handed it to him. I'm trusting you not to save my number under half-dressed smoke alarm lady. His grin was blinding. I make no promises. Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles, and a grandmother in the kitchen who'd been making the same recipes for 40 years. Elizabeth had agonized over what to wear, changing outfits 3 times before settling on a simple navy dress that made her feel pretty without trying too hard. Daniel was already there when she arrived, standing up from the table the moment he saw her. He was wearing a button-down shirt and dark jeans, and seeing him out of his firefighting gear was somehow both strange and thrilling. He looked younger, softer, like someone she might have met at a coffee shop or a bookstore, instead of in the middle of her worst nightmare. You look beautiful. You clean up pretty well yourself. Dinner was easy in a way Elizabeth hadn't expected. The awkwardness she'd anticipated, the weight of how they'd met, the strangeness of trying to build something normal from such extraordinary circumstances, never materialized. Instead, they talked like old friends, like people who'd known each other for years instead of hours. She learned that he'd wanted to be a firefighter since he was 7 years old, when a crew had rescued his family's cat from a tree. Technically, that's not even our job, but the guys at Station 12 did it anyway, because I was crying so hard I couldn't breathe. I decided right then that I wanted to be someone who helped people on their worst days. And is it what you expected? The job? His expression shifted, something heavier settling behind his eyes. Yes and no. The helping part is everything I dreamed it would be. But the parts they don't tell you about, the calls you can't save, the faces you can't forget, that part is harder than I ever imagined. Do you want to talk about it? Not yet. Not on our first date. But maybe someday? Whenever you're ready. He reached across the table and took her hand, and the gesture felt natural now. Right. Your turn. Tell me something about you that I couldn't learn from a 7-minute emergency response. Elizabeth thought about it, twirling her fork through her pasta. I'm a financial analyst, which sounds boring because it mostly is. I moved here 2 years ago for the job, and I still don't really know anyone. Most nights I come home to an empty apartment and watch cooking shows even though I can barely boil water without setting off a smoke alarm. She paused, glancing at him with a wry smile. As you may have noticed. I did notice that, yeah. I guess I'm kind of lonely, if I'm being honest. I have friends back home, but it's not the same. Everyone's busy with their own lives, and making new connections as an adult is harder than anyone tells you it's going to be. I know exactly what you mean. The guys at the station are like brothers, but it's not the same as having someone who knows you outside of the job, someone who asks how your day was and actually wants to hear the answer. Is that what you're looking for? I think I found it. The words settled over her like a warm blanket. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to lean into this feeling, this sense of rightness that she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. But underneath the warmth, a cold thread of doubt wound through her thoughts. Can I ask you something? Anything. How do you know, how can either of us know that what we're feeling is real? You saved me, Daniel. Or at least, you were there on the worst night of my life and you made me feel safe when I was terrified. How do I know I'm not just grateful? How do I know this isn't just some psychological response to trauma. His face grew serious, and he was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful.
I've thought about that too. Probably more than you realize. There's a reason most firefighters don't date people they meet on calls. It's messy, complicated. It's hard to separate the rescue from the reality.
He paused, turning his water glass in his hands.
But here's the thing. Gratitude fades. That rush of relief, that initial attachment, it doesn't last. What we're doing right now, sitting across from each other, actually talking, this is where we find out if there's something real underneath.
And if there isn't?
Then we'll know. And it'll hurt, but at least we'll have tried. At least we won't spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been.
Elizabeth felt tears prick at her eyes for the second time that week. You're very wise for someone who rescues cats from trees. The cat was 30 years ago. I've learned a few things since then. They took things slow. It was a conscious choice, made over that first dinner and reinforced in the weeks that followed. No rushing, no diving headfirst into something neither of them fully understood. Instead, they built their relationship brick by brick, laying a foundation of friendship before adding the weight of anything more. There were walks in the park on his days off, long conversations that stretched into the evening hours. There were phone calls late at night when he got home from a difficult shift, his voice raw and tired, needing someone to remind him why he did this job. There were texts throughout the day, mundane updates about meetings and errands that somehow felt precious because they were sharing their ordinary lives with each other. 1 month in, Elizabeth went to the station for the first time. The guys have been asking about you. I've told them a little, but they want to meet you. You don't have to if you're not comfortable. I want to. Station 47 was everything she'd imagined, and nothing like she'd expected. The firefighters were louder, funnier, more irreverent than she'd pictured. They welcomed her with handshakes and jokes about Daniel's legendary inability to cook, about the time he'd walked into a glass door chasing a suspected gas leak, about every embarrassing moment from 12 years of service. A grizzled older man named Lieutenant Keegan pulled her aside while Daniel was showing her the trucks. So you're the one. The one? The one who's got our captain walking around with that ridiculous grin on his face. He's been different the past few weeks. Lighter. We were starting to worry about him. Worry how? Keegan's expression softened. Daniel carries a lot. This job takes pieces of you, and he's been doing it for a long time. He doesn't talk about the hard calls, doesn't let anyone see when he's struggling. But lately, he shrugged. He seems like he's found something worth holding on to. Elizabeth looked across the garage at Daniel, who was explaining some piece of equipment to a group of young recruits. He caught her eye and smiled, that warm, genuine smile that still made her heart skip, and she felt the truth of Keegan's words settle into her bones. I'm trying to be that for him. Keep trying. He deserves it. 2 months in, the dam finally broke. It was late on a Tuesday night. Elizabeth had fallen asleep on Daniel's couch while they watched a movie, only to wake to the sound of him in the kitchen. She found him standing at the sink, his back to her, his shoulders shaking. Daniel? He didn't turn around. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you. What happened? For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, slowly, he turned. His eyes were red, his face streaked with tears. He was making no effort to hide. We lost one today. A little girl, 4 years old. Her house caught fire while her parents were sleeping, and by the time we got there, we couldn't... His voice cracked. She was the same age as my niece. Same curly hair. Same smile in the photos her parents showed us. Elizabeth didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Instead, she crossed the kitchen and wrapped her arms around him, holding him as tightly as she could while his grief poured out of him. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently. If we'd gotten there 2 minutes earlier, if I'd searched the second floor first instead of the basement, No, you don't do that to yourself. How can I not? Because you did everything right, Daniel. You ran into a burning building while everyone else ran out. You risk your life every single day to help strangers. One terrible loss doesn't erase the hundreds of people you've saved. But she's dead, Elizabeth. She's dead, and I couldn't save her, and her parents are never going to hold her again, and that's a tragedy. It's an unfathomable tragedy, and your grief is appropriate. But the weight of that child's death doesn't belong on your shoulders alone. You didn't set that fire. You didn't fail her. You tried. You tried with everything you had. He collapsed against her, his forehead pressed to her shoulder, his whole body shaking with sobs he'd been holding back for hours. Elizabeth held him, stroking his hair, murmuring words that meant nothing and everything at once. I'm here. I've got you. You don't have to carry this alone. They stayed like that for a long time. Eventually, his breathing steadied. He lifted his head, his eyes finding hers, and in the vulnerability of his gaze, she saw something new, something that looked a lot like trust. No one's ever seen me like this before. Not the guys at the station, not my family, no one. Why me? Because you're the only person I've ever met who makes me feel like it's okay to not be strong all the time. Like I don't have to be the hero every second of every day. You don't. You're allowed to be human, Daniel. You're allowed to break. I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air, fragile and precious. Elizabeth's heart hammered against her ribs. I think I'm falling in love with you too. He kissed her then, soft, almost tentative, like he was asking permission even as his lips met hers. She answered by pulling him closer, by letting him feel in her touch everything she couldn't put into words. After that night, things shifted between them. The careful distance they'd maintained gave way to something deeper, more intimate. Not physically, they were still taking their time with that, but emotionally. The walls came down, the masks fell away. Elizabeth met his family, his parents, his sister, his niece with the curly hair who climbed into her lap within 5 minutes of meeting her. She stood in his childhood kitchen while his mother showed her photo albums from his firefighting academy graduation, while his father grilled him about when he was going to make an honest woman of her. No pressure or anything. I'm so sorry about them. Don't be. I love them. He met her family too, a video call with her parents in Ohio, who interrogated him about his intentions for an hour before deciding he was acceptable. Her older brother, visiting for a weekend, who shook Daniel's hand firmly and said, "You hurt her, and they'll never find the body." Understood. He's mostly joking. Mostly. The external complications they'd feared, judgment from his colleagues, skepticism from her friends, never really materialized. A few raised eyebrows, maybe. A few concerned conversations about whether this was moving too fast, whether they really knew each other well enough. But everyone who saw them together saw the truth of what they'd built. This wasn't trauma bonding. This wasn't misplaced gratitude. This was two people who'd found each other against all odds and were choosing, every single day, to keep choosing each other. 6 months in, Elizabeth woke up in the middle of the night to an empty bed. She found Daniel on his balcony staring out at the city lights. He turned when he heard her approach, and the look on his face made her heart clench. "What's wrong?" "I need to tell you something, and I don't know how you're going to react." "Tell me." He took a deep breath. "I've been offered a promotion. Division chief. It's a desk job mostly, administrative, strategic planning, less running into burning buildings, more paperwork, and meetings." "Daniel, that's wonderful. Why do you look like you're delivering bad news?" "Because I'm thinking about turning it down." "What? Why?" "Because I'm not ready to stop being in the field. I know it's dangerous. I know you worry every time I go on shift. But running toward the fire, that's who I am. That's what I was born to do. And I'm scared that if I give that up, I'll lose the best part of myself." Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Can I tell you what I see when I look at you?" "Okay." "I see someone who has dedicated his entire life to helping people. Someone who has pulled children from rubble and carried grandmothers down burning staircases and held the hands of dying strangers so they wouldn't be alone. I see a hero, Daniel. A real one." She paused, tightening her grip on his hand. "But I also see someone who has given so much of himself that there's almost nothing left. Someone who wakes up screaming from nightmares he won't talk about. Someone who carries the weight of every person he couldn't save like a stone around his neck. It's not— let me finish. I fell in love with the man who runs into burning buildings. I will always love that man. But I also love the man who wants to come home at night. The man who wants to build a life, a family, a future. And if taking that promotion means you get to be both, the hero and the man, then I think you should take it." "You wouldn't think less of me for stepping back?" "I would think you were finally treating your own life like it was worth saving." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I don't deserve you." "No, you don't. But you're stuck with me anyway." 1 year to the day after the false alarm that had brought them together, Daniel asked Elizabeth to meet him at her building. He wouldn't tell her why, just that it was important, that she needed to trust him. She found him waiting in the hallway outside her apartment, dressed in the same uniform he'd worn the night they met. Her heart clenched at the sight. "What are you doing?" "Recreating history, or maybe rewriting it." He knocked on her door, 3 sharp raps, just like a year ago. "Should I go change into my underwear?" "That won't be necessary, although I wouldn't object." She rolled her eyes and opened the door, playing along. "Fire department? At this hour?" "Ma'am, I'm Captain Daniel Reeves. I received a report of a fire at this location." "What kind of fire?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, the diamond inside caught the hallway light and scattered tiny rainbows across the walls. "The kind that's been burning in my chest since the moment I met you." Elizabeth's hand flew to her mouth. "Daniel." 1 year ago, I showed up at your door on what I thought was a routine call. I never expected to meet someone who would change my entire life, someone who would see past the uniform, past the hero complex, past all the walls I'd built to protect myself. Someone who would hold me when I broke and love me anyway. He got down on one knee, right there in the hallway of her apartment building, and looked up at her with eyes full of love and hope and just a little bit of fear. Elizabeth Mercer, I know how we met was unconventional. I know there are people who think this happened too fast or that it can't possibly be real. But I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You are my home. You are my safe place. You are the person I want to come back to at the end of every shift, the person I want to wake up next to every morning. Tears were streaming down Elizabeth's face. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at this man who had crashed into her life and refused to leave. Will you marry me? Yes, 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 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet as he kissed her. The neighbors were starting to peek out of their doors, drawn by the commotion, but Elizabeth didn't care. Let them see. Let the whole world see. I love you, Elizabeth. I love you too. Even if you did scare 10 years off my life with that fake fire alarm announcement. Consider it payback for opening the door in your underwear. I was wearing a shirt. Barely. They were still laughing when they finally made it inside, the door closing on the applauding neighbors and the beginning of the rest of their lives. The wedding was small, just family and close friends, gathered in a garden venue with string lights overhead and flowers everywhere. Elizabeth's brother walked her down the aisle because her father had passed away 3 years earlier. And when she saw Daniel standing at the altar, tears already streaming down his face, she nearly lost the ability to walk entirely. His vows were simple. Elizabeth, I have spent my whole life running toward danger. It's what I was trained to do, what I was born to do. But you taught me that the bravest thing a person can do isn't run into a fire. It's open your heart to another person, knowing you might get burned. I choose you. Today, tomorrow, and every day for the rest of my life. I will always choose you. Hers were simpler still. Daniel, you came into my life on the worst night I've ever had, and you made me believe that everything was going to be okay. You were right. As long as I'm with you, everything is always going to be okay. I love you. I trust you. I'm ready to spend forever with you. When the officiant pronounced them married, Daniel kissed her like they were the only 2 people in the world. The audience cheered. His crew from Station 47 set off air horns. Somewhere in the crowd, Lieutenant Keegan was definitely crying. At the reception, they danced their first dance to a slow song that neither of them could remember picking. It didn't matter. What mattered was his arms around her, her head on his shoulder, the solid certainty that this moment, this man, this life was exactly where she was supposed to be. So, Mrs. Reeves, any regrets? Only that I didn't let you check every room that first night. What would I have found? A woman who was about to meet the love of her life. If I'd known, I would have put on something nicer than that ratty old t-shirt. I thought you were perfect. You have terrible taste. The best taste. I picked you, didn't I? 3 years later, Elizabeth stood in the doorway of their nursery, watching Daniel rock their daughter to sleep. He was humming something, a lullaby his mother used to sing, and the baby's eyes were heavy, her tiny fingers wrapped around his pinky. The promotion had come through. He was division chief now, still serving, still saving lives, but coming home to her every night instead of running into flames. Sometimes she caught him looking wistful, mourning the thrill of the front lines, but then he'd see her or hold their daughter, and the wistfulness would fade. She's almost out. 5 more minutes. I'm not ready to put her down. Elizabeth crossed the room and wrapped her arms around both of them, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and the familiar warmth of her husband. Have I told you lately that you're an amazing father?
You might have mentioned it once or twice.
Well, it bears repeating. He turned his head to press a kiss to her temple.
You know what I was thinking about today? That night? The smoke alarm? Your stupid t-shirt?
My barely covers anything shirt, according to you.
I walked away from your apartment that night and I couldn't stop thinking about you. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that you were just another call, just another face I'd forget by the end of the week. But you weren't. You were the beginning of everything. The beginning of everything. I like that. The baby stirred, made a soft cooing sound, and settled back into sleep. Daniel looked down at her with such love it made Elizabeth's heart ache. She looks like you.
She has your chin.
Poor kid. Lucky kid. She has you for a father.
They stood there together in the soft glow of the nightlight. A family built from a false alarm and a half-dressed encounter, and a love neither of them had seen coming. Outside, the city hummed with life. Sirens in the distance, traffic on the highway, a million other people living their million other lives. But in this room, in this moment, there was only them. Only the quiet certainty that they had found something rare, something worth fighting for. I love you, Daniel Reeves.
I love you too, Elizabeth Reeves. Forever and always.
She smiled, leaning into him, watching their daughter sleep. Forever and always. That sounded just about right. Did you like the story? Do you want a part 2? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Also, comment which state you're watching from so I can give you a shout out in the next videos. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel so you can stay updated on our next uploads. Thanks for watching!